Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Sig Romeo 7S. But before we get into the video, if you don't know, Gun Deals is a website where you can find the best deals on the internet. Also important to note, they don't buy or sell anything. They don't take your money. They only provide links, again, to some of the best deals on the internet. So if you like saving money on cool stuff, go ahead and check them out. That is, again, gun.deals. Now, with that out of the way, full disclosure, on the Sig Romeo 7S, I have absolutely no relationship with SIG whatsoever. I have had one email conversation with their customer service team. Other than that, there has never been any communication between myself and SIG. Now, this is, of course, the Optics Planet modification. So this is actually the FDE version that they sell exclusively. I paid, I believe, $170 for the Romeo 7S Green Dot on sale. Now, I personally do have a relationship with Optics Planet and I have a discount code with them. However, I purchased this optic for full price, or at least sale price on the optic, and there is no sort of affiliation with this review. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some of the basic specifications on the Romeo 7S. So the first thing that you guys probably notice is that the 7S line, both the black, the FDE red and green dot versions, are based off of the Aimpoint Comp M5. These are basically Cope M5s, meaning that they have a very similar body style, battery tray, and overall design. Now, the weight on the optics, these are slightly bigger than your standard T1, T2 micro style optics. The weight on both optics with the riser plate, I believe, comes in at 7.7 ounces, which is not that bad. It's about 2 or 3 ounces heavier than your standard T1 or 2T micro style optics, depending on the mount, of course. Now, a couple other notable features on the Sig Romeo 7S is that they do utilize a side loading battery tray with a AAA battery. Personally, I'm a big fan of AA and AAA batteries on Red Dots, merely for the fact that they're very inexpensive and very easy to source, and most of us probably have a ton lying around. Now, on top of that, the body itself is slightly larger than your standard 20mm optics. It actually has a 22mm window size, so it's not all that noticeable, but it is, again, slightly larger than your standard T1, T2 style optics. Now, on top of that, we do have exposed windage and elevation knobs. However, they are very nicely covered up and recessed into the body, or at least the body has a lot of aluminum buildup around them to make them less likely to be hit or knocked or bumped off. The adjustments themselves are half MOA, and they're actually quite nice for what it's worth. Now, the body itself is made out of 6061 T6 aluminum, and it does, of course, have this kind of integrated mount with a riser plate. The base mount height is 1.41, or an absolute co-witness, and with the riser plate installed, it is a 1.635, or a lower 1/3 co-witness. Now, the mount design itself is also quite robust, and this is where some of that weight is added. It is a very large chunk of aluminum. It has a singular large cross bolt with a 1/2-inch hex nut, and it is a squared off recoil lug-esque cross bolt, which is quite nice. That will, of course, increase the surface contact between your upper receiver and your optic. On top of that, it also has built-in recoil lugs on the bottom of the optic. Overall, the design of the optic is definitely a little bit heavier than other micro-style optics, but it is a very tanky, very strong design. Now, on the back of the battery tray, we do, of course, have our illumination knob. I believe we have 2 night vision settings and 9 daylight settings. Using this sort of optic with passive aiming under night vision is probably a little bit optimistic, but it is, I suppose, a nice feature for a certain set of people. The green dot version does definitely get daylight bright on the max setting. However, it should be noted on the max setting, it is slightly dimmer than other optics that I've seen, even in this price point. And the last thing that it comes with are these 2 clear flip-up caps, which are actually quite nice and they don't cost anything extra. It's a nice little feature, especially if you're like me and you tend to get rained on or snowed on quite a bit. It's nice to throw those guys on and kind of protect the lens a little bit, and then when you actually need to use them or just uncover your lenses, you can go ahead and do that. Now, with the green 2 MOA dot and AAA battery, this is still rated at 50,000 hours of battery life. However, again, because this is a SIG optic, it does come with their patented MOTAC technology, their motion activation, which is very good. It has been perfect on every SIG Red Dot that I have ever tested, and this one is no different. What that means is when it's at rest for a certain period of time, it will automatically turn off, and then as soon as you touch it, If you even just place your hand on the gun, it will automatically turn on, and therefore that extends your battery life theoretically to as long as that battery itself can actually hold a charge. So now let's go ahead and talk about the emitter, the dot, and of course the glass quality. So the emitter seems to be of very high quality. In terms of its refresh rate, it does have a very fast, very laser-like refresh rate. On some other optics at lower brightness levels, you might notice a little bit of shimmering or flickering if you're moving very fast, where the dot is turning on and off as it's going. That's more of a slight annoyance, though it can be detrimental to performance. Though again, on the Sig Romeo 7S, it is a very solid laser-like beam pattern, and it looks quite good. Now, when we talk about the dot itself, one of my complaints with the 7S or the 7S Red Dot version was that at higher brightness settings, it tended to bloom out quite a bit and halo a lot more than other red dots. On the green version, it doesn't do that, though the dot is still not of the highest quality. If you look at it in some of the videos and images, you'll see it's less of a circle and more of like a horizontal line, depending on how you're looking at the dot. It's still definitely usable, and again, we're still talking about a red dot, so it's not really all that precise to begin with, but the dot quality itself is just not quite as nice, as crisp as other dots that I've seen on the market. Now, on top of that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it does get daylight bright. However, it seems to be 1 or 2 steps below other red dots' maximum brightness levels. That could be to do with how my eyes pick up the green dot, but in general, it seems a little bit dimmer on max brightness, which is when I'm outside, I'm usually using this on max daylight brightness. However, that does seem to, again, be just a little bit dimmer than other red dots on, say, 2 or 3 steps below max brightness. Now, the trade-off there is that this one here does not halo out or bloom as bad as the red dot version does, but the green dot is, of course, just a little bit less bright. And on top of that, even right now indoors, when I have it on maximum brightness, yes, the dot itself is blooming out a little bit, but you don't get any of that halo or that shimmering effect over the entire glass like you would do on the Romeo 7S red version. So the green version, it is better in some ways than the red version, but it's still, I would say, overall held back just a little bit. The dot is not quite as crisp as I would like it to be, and I would like it to have essentially 1 extra brightness setting. Now, when we talk about the glass itself, it is actually quite good. The glass itself is crisp. There is very little warping or distortion. It is very, very, very close to a perfect 1x, unlike some other red dots on the market. It does have a little bit of that notch filter look, a little bit of that blue-green tint, but a very, very minor amount, definitely a lot less noticeable than some other red dots that I've used on the market. Overall, the glass itself for white light shooting, for daylight shooting, it looks very good. There's very minimal distortion. It's very crisp, it's very clear. The overall light transmission is probably suboptimal to much nicer, much more expensive optics, but that's kind of part and parcel with this level of optics in this price range. Now, personally, one of my favorite things about the 7S in this price point is that you don't need to do anything to it. You don't need to swap out the mount whatsoever like you would on most budget T1 or 2T style mounts, whether that's a Romeo 5, a Romeo MSR, whether that's any of the Holosun lower tiered optics, the 500, the 503, and the 403s, any of those. You probably want to swap out the mount just to ensure the highest level of zero holding capabilities, and of course, if it encounters a sharp impact, it will actually retain zero a lot better if you improve the mount. Fortunately, the mount that comes with the Sig Romeo 7S and 7 are very, very good. You can quite easily get 65 inch-pounds of torque on your crossbow, and of course, on top of that, you have the squared off crossbow, which acts like a recoil lug, as well as an integrated recoil lug as well. So overall, the optic body itself is very tough, very tanky. The design is very good, of course, because it's copy and pasted from the Aimpoint Comp M5. And on top of that, the mount design was done quite well. Now, the downside of this optic versus those other, Sig Romeo 5, MSR, Holosuns, that sort of thing, is that it is going to be a little bit heavier. However, it's not going to be as heavy as the Sig Romeo 7. So this is basically, for me, if you're looking for a Comp M5, but you don't want to pay $1,000 for a Comp M5 and a decent mount, the Sig Romeo 7S does basically all of those things. It has a very good, very tanky body design, as well as a good mount design for about 1/5 the price. Now, it's not a perfect optic. None of the $200 and under optics even come close to a perfect optic. A lot of them, you either need to swap the mount on them, and then you're, betting that those electronics do not die on you over time. With this optic, you don't need to change anything on it, but the red dot, or in this case, the green dot itself, is a little bit subpar. So just because it gets a little bit dimmer and the dot is not quite as crisp as I would like to see, it does definitely lag behind in performance in those areas. Not a huge amount, but it is something that still is noticeable and something that for some people will be a much bigger deal. So I do think it is a very high value optic and a very good option for you. If you just want a very tanky, red dot that you don't have to do anything to for under $200, personally, I would actually go with the red version over the green version, unless you just like green or green works better for your eyes. However, the red version, while it does bloom out faster and gets a little uglier when you have it too bright, the dot does get more than bright enough where I would say that this does lag behind just a little bit. Again, neither of them are perfect, but for the money, you're getting one of the tankiest optics, one of the best designed ones. And as long as you're aware of the downsides and it still meets your needs for a given application, then it absolutely is a good value. Is it for everybody? No, but it is still another good option, another competitive option in the sub $200 red dots. Now, there are a ton of good options in the $100 to $200 range, and personally for me, this stacks towards the top of that list, but not quite at the top. But it does, of course, look cool, especially in this Opmod FDE, and that is, of course, all that matters. So with all that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of the 7S down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.